When you show up as your true unfiltered self, you disrupt the status quo. The world has been conditioned to reward sameness, to celebrate those who fit into neat little boxes, and to make life easier for those who follow the script. But you weren't made to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You weren't designed to dim your light just so it wouldn't blind those who refuse to see their own brilliance. Your authenticity shakes the foundation of a system that thrives on conformity, and that makes people uneasy. People are often taught, sometimes unconsciously, that blending in is safer than standing out, that agreeing is easier than questioning, that adapting to the expectations of others will keep them accepted, validated, and included. But then you walk in, fully yourself, unapologetic, refusing to conform, and suddenly those who have spent their lives molding themselves to fit expectations are forced to confront a truth they've been avoiding, that they too had a choice, that they too could have been bold enough to embrace who they really are. But instead of acknowledging that, instead of celebrating your freedom, they reject it. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because they can't face the discomfort of their own reflection in you. Your presence becomes a mirror revealing the compromises they've made, the dreams they've abandoned, the versions of themselves they've hidden away to gain approval. And for some, that's too much to handle. Rather than embrace the inspiration you offer, they push you away, label you as too much, or try to make you doubt yourself. Because if they accept you as you are, they have to acknowledge what they are not. And not everyone is ready for that level of truth. But here's what you need to remember. That's not your problem to fix. You were never meant to make yourself smaller to fit their comfort. You weren't put here to make your existence easier for others to digest. The right people, the ones who are ready to live freely, who celebrate authenticity, who want more than just surface-level existence, will recognize you. They will embrace you. And the rest? Let them be uncomfortable, because in that discomfort, there is growth waiting to happen. Whether they choose to grow is up to them. But you're going to keep shining. People often resist what they don't understand. It's human nature to be wary of the unfamiliar, to question what doesn't fit into their preconceived ideas of how the world should work. And when you show up as your most authentic self, without filters, without pretense, you become that unfamiliar presence. You challenge the narratives they've grown comfortable with, the masks they've convinced themselves they need to wear, and the limits they've placed on their own self-expression. That's why they struggle to handle you. Your confidence, your realness, the way you refuse to dilute who you are, it confuses them. Because for so long, they've operated under the belief that in order to be accepted, they have to shapeshift, they have to compromise, they have to fit in. And yet, here you are, proving that none of that is necessary. You stand as living proof that being yourself is enough. But instead of letting that inspire them, many choose to reject it. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because your existence forces them to question everything they thought they knew. They wonder how you can be so bold, how you can walk into a room without seeking approval, how you can speak your truth without hesitation. And beneath those questions is something deeper, fear. Because if you can do it, what does that say about all the times they chose to stay silent? If you can be yourself without apology, what does that say about all the times they sacrificed pieces of who they were just to belong? Instead of facing that reality, they push back. They label you as too much or difficult or different, not because you are, but because they don't know how to process someone who refuses to be anything other than real. But that's not your burden to carry. You are not responsible for making yourself smaller so others can remain comfortable in their limitations. You are not meant to be understood by everyone, and you certainly don't need their permission to exist as you are. The right people, the ones who are ready to embrace truth, growth, and authenticity, will see you for exactly who you are and value you because of it. And to the rest, let them misunderstand you. That's their journey, not yours. Not everyone is ready for realness. That's the truth. Some people have spent their entire lives surrounded by facades, living in spaces where surface-level interactions are the norm, where fitting in matters more than standing out, where keeping the peace is prioritized over speaking the truth. And when you come along, fully yourself, unafraid to be raw and unapologetic, they don't know how to handle it. Not because you're wrong, not because you're too much, but because they've never had to deal with someone who refuses to play the game. Authenticity isn't just about being yourself. It's about being yourself consistently. It's about showing up the same way in every space, regardless of who's watching. And that kind of consistency is rare in a world that encourages people to wear different masks depending on the situation. So when you refuse to put on an act, it unsettles them. They question how you can be so open, why you don't feel the need to adjust yourself for approval, why you don't bend to meet the expectations that have controlled them for so long. Instead of seeing it as a strength, they see it as a challenge, a disruption to the way they've learned to exist. For some, your authenticity feels like a direct threat, not because you've done anything wrong, but because your presence exposes the parts of themselves they've buried, the dreams they didn't chase, the words they left unspoken, the truth they were too afraid to claim. And instead of facing that, instead of letting your realness inspire them to step into their own, they reject it. They convince themselves that you must be the problem, that you must be reckless, naive, or even selfish for refusing to conform. Because if they admit that you're simply living in your truth, they also have to admit that they've been hiding from theirs. But that's not your concern. You were never meant to be small enough to fit into spaces that weren't built for you. You were never meant to shrink yourself just to make others comfortable. The people who are ready for realness, the ones who have done the work to embrace truth, will see you and recognize you instantly. And those who aren't, that's their battle to fight, not yours. Your authenticity doesn't just make people uncomfortable, it forces them to confront parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. When you live unapologetically, when you refuse to water yourself down for approval, you expose the hidden insecurities of those around you. Not because you're trying to, not because you set out to challenge them, but simply because your presence is a reminder of everything they've suppressed within themselves. Think about it. How many people have abandoned their dreams because they were told they were unrealistic? How many have stayed silent in moments when they desperately wanted to speak up just to avoid judgment? How many have spent their entire lives trying to fit a mold, sacrificing pieces of who they are just to be accepted? Then you come along, bold, fearless, unwilling to compromise your truth, and suddenly they're faced with a difficult realization. If you can be fully yourself, then why can't they? If you can walk in your truth without apology, then what's stopping them? That's a hard question to sit with, and instead of dealing with it, many people choose the easier route, projecting their insecurities onto you. They call you too much because they've been told to be less. They call you difficult because they've been conditioned to always take the easy road. They call you intimidating because your confidence reminds them of the power they've been too afraid to claim. It has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. But rather than own their own discomfort, they deflect, they criticize, they distance themselves, they find ways to make you feel like the problem because it's easier to blame you than to admit that they've been holding themselves back. And you know what? That's not your burden to carry. You weren't put here to make other people comfortable. You weren't meant to dim your light just so they don't have to face their own shadows. Your only job is to continue being yourself, to continue showing up as the person you were meant to be. Because the people who are ready to grow, the ones who are willing to face themselves and evolve, will see you as inspiration, not a threat. And those who can't handle that, they were never meant to walk this path with you anyway. Real power doesn't come from controlling others. It doesn't come from status, approval, or fitting into someone else's definition of success. Real power comes from knowing who you are, standing in your truth, and refusing to let the world reshape you into something more convenient. And that kind of power, it intimidates those who haven't found it within themselves. When you move through life unapologetically, people who rely on facades don't know how to handle it. They've built their confidence on external validation, on being liked, on following the rules, on keeping their opinions just palatable enough to avoid controversy. But you don't play by those rules. You don't need their approval to feel whole. And that shakes them. Because if you don't need permission to be yourself, then maybe, just maybe, they never needed it either. But admitting that means admitting they've spent years, maybe even their entire lives, waiting for something they never actually needed. Instead of recognizing your confidence as something to be admired, they see it as something to be feared. Your presence reminds them of their own hesitation, their own unwillingness to step outside the boxes they've been placed in. So they try to diminish you. They call you arrogant, rebellious, unfiltered, too bold. Not because you are, but because they aren't. Because your ability to stand tall makes them feel smaller in comparison, and rather than rise to meet you, they try to bring you down to their level. But their fear is not your responsibility. You didn't come into this world to make yourself more digestible for people who refuse to grow. You weren't meant to play small so others don't feel threatened by the light you carry. If your confidence unsettles them, that's their battle to fight, not yours. If your authenticity makes them uncomfortable, that's a sign of their own work left undone. Because true power isn't about making others feel weak. It's about inspiring them to find their own strength. And the people who are ready for that, they'll see you, they'll recognize you, they'll celebrate you. Because the ones who have done the work, the ones who have stepped into their own power, will never be intimidated by yours. Rejection is never easy, especially when all you've done is be yourself. When you show up authentically, when you refuse to play a role just to fit in, some people will walk away. They'll make excuses, distance themselves, or even try to make you feel like you were the problem. And for a while, that might hurt. It might make you question if being real is worth it. But here's the truth. Rejection is just redirection. Every person who leaves your life because they couldn't handle your authenticity is making space for the right ones to enter. It's easy to take it personally, to wonder if maybe you should have toned yourself down or softened your edges to keep them around. But the people who walk away were never meant for you in the first place. If someone can't handle your honesty, your passion, your depth, then they were never capable of truly appreciating you. And why would you want to waste your time convincing someone to value what the right people will recognize instantly? When someone rejects you for being real, it's not a loss. It's a filter. It's life's way of removing the people who were never aligned with you to begin with. It's making room for the ones who will understand you, who will embrace you exactly as you are. The friendships, relationships, and opportunities that come after rejection are the ones that will actually support your growth, not stifle it. You are not for everyone, and that is a good thing. The goal was never to be liked by everyone. The goal was to be seen fully, completely, without compromise by the people who truly matter. And that kind of connection, that kind of belonging, only happens when you stop chasing approval and start trusting that what's meant for you will never require you to be anything other than yourself. So let them leave, let them misunderstand you, let them go. Every time someone walks away because they can't handle your authenticity, you're being redirected towards something better, something real, something that doesn't require you to shrink, pretend, or perform. And when you finally find it, you'll realize losing them was never really a loss at all.